We've had a choice. You can reduce crime or you can play politics. And unfortunately, we've been playing politics. We've been passing things like mandatory minimum sentences, 3 strikes and you're out, life without parole. If you can get the slogan to rhyme, it's even better. If you do the adult crime, you do the adult time. My personal favorite is, if I'm elected, there'll be no cable TV in the prisons. You can just imagine the cable guy showing up at the prison, disconnecting the cable, and everybody sitting back waiting for the crime rate to go down all over the community. Well, those slogans don't do anything to reduce crime, but they do end up locking a lot of people up. This is a chart of every country that you can name, incarceration rate per 100,000, most of them between 50 and 200 per 100,000. The only outlier is Russia, about 620, 600 and some per 100,000. Is the only one close to the United States of America, which is #1 in the world at 700 and some per 100,000. Now, that is particularly egregious because the Pew Research Forum calculated that anything over 500 per 100,000 was actually injecting more social pathology into the community than it was curing. The stigma, so many people have criminal records that the stigma of a criminal record doesn't have any deterrent effect. Employment is so bad because people can't get employment, so businesses don't want to come into a high unemployment, high crime area. And so you've injected more social pathology. If you're running up an incarceration rate, anything over 500, United States 700 and some per 100,000. To add insult and injury, the first purple bar is African American average in the United States, 2,200. The last bar almost off the chart at 4,000. 10 states are locking up African Americans at the rate of 4,000 per 100,000. And we know that, and remember, 500 per 100,000, over that is counterproductive. You get nothing for it. And that's a direct result of all of the slogans and sound bites that we've been codifying over the years. And we know that education is an important factor in dealing with crime. This chart shows the difference in the last 30 years. 1970, purple is a high school dropout, green high school graduate. This is a chart for African American males, 26 to 30. African American males, 26 to 30. In 1970, if you dropped out or graduated from high school, you could pretty much get a job, few of them out in the streets, a handful in jail. But by 2000, because we've got an information-based, high-tech economy, if you want a job, you need an education. Only 30% of African-American male high school dropouts, by the time they're in their late 20s, have a job. In fact, more of those are out in the street without a job, and incredibly, slightly more than that, are actually found in jail today. More in jail than working if you're a high school dropout. And so we know that education is an important factor when we talk about what the criminal justice prevention efforts ought to be focused on. In fact, we know that education in high school dropouts doesn't occur overnight. It's a long-term continuum. And therefore, if you want to fight crime, you have to have a long-term, overall, holistic approach, starting very early, even with teen pregnancy prevention, so that fewer babies are born into dysfunctional families, prenatal care to reduce mental retardation and learning disabilities, nurse home visits, which will reduce the number of children subjected to child abuse. The nurse home visit program has been studied and showed that 18 years later, the arrest rate of those with the nurse visits was only 1/3 of those who did not have the nurse visits. Early childhood education, making sure the children can read by the 3rd grade, that is educators tell us that is an important marker because they tell us up to the 3rd grade, you're learning to read. After the 3rd grade, you read to learn. If you can't read after the 3rd grade, you can't learn after the 3rd grade, and you're off to the races. Other programs, after-school programs, mentoring programs, make sure that the kids get into college and are encouraged to go to college. Those are the kinds of things that will actually reduce crime. One of the questions is, can we afford all of those prevention programs? Can we afford it? I mean, you got to spend money for that kind of thing, and as I indicated, we're spending money now, and let's put a little money on the table and see where we're going. What if we reduce the African American average incarceration rate from 2,200 to 500? That's the most you can get before you go into counterproductive, per 100,000. Well, that would reduce from 2,200 to 500 per 100,000, 1,700 fewer inmates at about $30,000 a year, almost $50 million in a community of 100,000. They're wasting in counterproductive incarceration. There are only about 30,000 children in that area, so just do the division. $1,600 per child per year wasted on counterproductive incarceration. And if you actually targeted the money to the 1/3 of the children that really needed it, you're up to about $5,000 a year per child every year. In 10 states, where the worst 10 states would be a reduction from 4,000 to 500 per 100,000, 3,500 fewer people incarcerated, $100 million. Think of a community, a city, a town, an area, 100,000 population, they're wasting $100 million a year. 30,000 kids, do the arithmetic, $3,300 per child every year that they're wasting on counterproductive incarceration. And again, if you targeted that to where it would actually do some good, where they really need it, you could spend $10,000 per year per child, or you can waste it in counterproductive incarceration. And my question is, what kind of people would say, well, let's not spend $10,000 a year per child every year, getting them on the right track and keeping them on the right track. Let's instead save the money, wait for them to join a gang, drop out of school, mess up, and then we can lock them up in counterproductive incarceration. What kind of people would make that decision? Well, 10 states are making that decision today. That's why we introduced the Youth Promise Act. The Youth Promise Act is a bill that would focus on prevention and early intervention. It requires a community to come together, get everybody around the table that has anything to do with children getting in trouble. You're talking about law enforcement, obviously the school system, foster care, mental health, boys and girls clubs, businesses, because they're going to be, those are the ones who will hire the children, court services, everybody, the faith-based community, everybody that has anything to do with children getting in trouble, get around the table and first determine what your problem is, and then come up with a solution. And what the problem is, if you're locking up people at the rate of 4,000 per 100,000 and wasting in your community up to $10,000 a year per child, put that number on the table right in front of you so you can see it. If Los Angeles County put that number on the table, the number would be $5 billion. They're spending on incarceration today. Put that number on the table, because if you're going to reduce crime 50%, and you've got $100 million that you're spending in counterproductive incarceration, do not limit your imagination to programs that cost $15,000 or $30,000. If you're talking about $100 million and can cut that in half, be bold and get the job done. One of the things that we require is that the plan be research-based, evidence-based plan, not slogan-based, not politically based, but research-based. And we know that those kinds of solutions that you come up with will work because the research is there. They put a comprehensive approach together in Boston. They've been experiencing 12 juvenile murders a year for years, about one a month. After they put one of these plans and spent a little money in advance, they went 3 years without a single juvenile murder. Pennsylvania did one in 100 different communities. They spent $60 million in various communities around the state. By the time, a couple of years later, they went back and noticed that they had saved $300 million. Spent 60, saved $300 million because they had reduced crime so much. Richmond, Virginia, 17 murders at the beginning of the program per year, at the end of the program, 2. And if you just look at, it costs $2.9 million, and if you just look at the uncompensated care at the Medical College of Virginia for gunshot wounds that they'd been paying for, no longer paying for, they would save $2.9 million in uncompensated medical care, to say nothing about the police and courts to chase after and then lock up the incarceration costs for the people that were actually doing it. So we know that the plans work. We know that they can save more money than they cost. And so we want to, we're proud of the fact that we've got significant support around the country. We have in the House, more than half the House has already co-sponsored the bill. We've got cities around the country, one of which is Pasadena, Somebody here from Pasadena? I met a councilwoman from Pasadena last night, and she said she was going to try to be here. They have endorsed it, several in Virginia. Pennsylvania have endorsed the National Council of Council of Cities, the National Counties Organization, National Association of Counties. A lot of organizations, civil rights, juvenile justice organizations have endorsed it. And you wonder at this point, well, what's the problem? The problem, as I indicated, we have a choice. What is the choice? We can reduce crime with intelligent, evidence-based programs, or we can play politics. There is an alternative bill. It's called the Gang Abatement and Prevention Bill, which is essentially a lock-em-up bill. I'm going to just give you 3 provisions. One is that it includes some more juvenile life without parole. We are the only country on earth that locks up children juvenile life without parole, the only one. This will expand it, make things worse, make that first graph even worse than it was. It has gang definitions, and anybody can tell you if you have a definition of a gang in practice, it's going to be racially discriminatory. Again, making those 2 purple bars even worse. It has a provision to increase penalties. You designated, just give you one, if you designated a gang member and you commit a violent crime that is not serious, I don't know, it's got to be a felony, but not serious. I guess that's something like throwing a banana at somebody in the cafeteria. I don't know what a violent crime, not serious. But anyway, 20 years, up to 20 years for a violent crime, not serious. In the federal system, there's no parole. You just wonder, you know, we're marching all in the street because the Jena 6 got 20 years. And you wonder how that happened? Well, how many people think that this kind of bill could pass the United States Senate? Well, it did 3 years ago. Anybody remember the vote? No, you don't remember the vote because it passed by unanimous consent. Came to my subcommittee, I chaired the crime subcommittee, came to my subcommittee and I killed it. I was into that. Unfortunately, the new Congress, they're trying again. And that is given credit, quite frankly, for as the alternative. We have to stop going in the wrong direction. I've told people that, you know, you kind of compromise down, don't make it so bad, but going slower in the wrong direction is not progress. We cannot compromise with this. We have to turn in the right direction and go in the right direction for once. It is not easy. Some of these slogans and sound bites just recently, we're in the process of passing a bill with a new mandatory minimum in it, and everybody's mad at me because I'm not going to vote for the mandatory minimum. And you wonder, well, mandatory minimums have been studied, racially discriminatory, wasting taxpayers' money, and I'm on the defensive because I oppose it. I mean, you know, you got to get to the point where, you know, they say, well, it's just one more. Those purple bars didn't start up that way overnight. There's just one more, just one more, just a little one here and a little one there. At some point, you got to say, no, indeed, we're not going there anymore. And that's why the Youth Promise Act, first we have to stop going in the wrong direction and defeat the bad bill and start going in the right direction with the Youth Promise Act. We have a very distinguished panel with us today. It's going to be moderated by Tara Andrews, who is currently the Deputy Executive Director of Policy and Programs at the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. Prior to joining that organization, she was a civil rights attorney and worked in the state of Maryland with the Maryland Juvenile Justice Coalition, working on sentencing reform, confinement, reentry policies, and improving Maryland's criminal justice and particularly juvenile justice system. Her whole resume is in your package. She has been a leader in helping organize the congressional efforts in developing the bill and getting it through. We're going to have a markup just within the next couple of weeks in the Judiciary Committee. So please welcome our moderator today, Tara Andrews.
I'm going to moderate from my seat. I want to invite, yes, folks who are on the wall, if you want to come over and transition to this side of the room, but we still have some more seats over here. And for those of you who are looking for Dr. Ogletree or Judge Hatchett, they are so sought after for their expertise that they're actually splitting their time between here and another important issue. So they will be joining us shortly. But we are happy to have, as Representative Scott, a number of folks here from a number of different sectors and disciplines to talk about the wisdom of the promise approach and add more fuel to the fire about why more of us need to get behind this and push to make sure that this happens and happens this Congress. So let me just briefly, I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of the panelists, even the ones who are not here, and then we will begin, and excuse me, I'm going to, Representative Scott, do you have any introductory information from Mr. Bryant?
There's some people for whom we can say he needs no introduction. Most people internationally know Jim Brown in his professional football career, but a lot of people, particularly in Southern California, know him in American, working with young people, getting them on the right track, keeping them on the right track, and those that have gotten off track, getting them back on track. He has been working hard in one of the most successful programs going, and we are just delighted that he was walking around and said, I want to be in the Youth Promise Act workshop. He can't stay for the whole workshop, but we are just delighted to have a person of his caliber. Please welcome Jim Brown.
Thank you, Congressman, and I applaud you for your act. And I would like to thank all of you for being here. I'm going to deal with facts because I'm past the philosophy stage. American is an action organization that has been in existence for 20 years. It has basically been privately funded, which has allowed us to maintain our integrity. And we have some facts I'd like to put out to you. One of the biggest problems we have in our communities is a lack of African American fathers. A lot of them are gang members. A lot of them are shot callers in gang members. And a lot of them have 3 to 4 kids. And most of them do not take care of those kids. Their influence on a community is devastating because when you have violence and young black men killing each other in a community, how is that community going to strive in any positive way? When the fathers are not in the home, what do the mothers do? How do the kids get educated? How do the kids get guidance? So let me put it to you this way. American decided that we had to go out 20 years ago and develop a relationship with those power brokers in those neighborhoods across the country and see how many of those individuals wanted to change their lives. And if they decided to change their lives, you could change the profile of that total community. We had to visit prisons and develop relationships, juvenile facilities and develop relationships and community, because they all connect. Are you following me so far? Okay, an example of something. In California, we have developed many young men that are now taking care of their own biological children. The impact that have on a community is unbelievable, because no longer are they committing crime, but they are taking the rightful position as a father and guiding their own biological children, which takes that weight off of the community. Okay? American was created with a curriculum of life management skills which changes the attitude of an individual and allow them to take responsibility for their own actions. So what you want a person to do is take responsibility for themselves. All of these young men take responsibility for themselves. But when you deal with change, you must deal with economics and the need of economics. We say food, shelter, and clothing is number 1. So how do you take the shot callers from the community, get them to change their lives, take care of their babies, and not have a job. So because they took the curriculum, they were able to be taught how to teach the curriculum.
Right.
And when they learn to teach the curriculum, they can make a legitimate living without losing any face in the community.
Right.
And they become professors of the American curriculum. And we are able to get contracts with schools and prisons and in communities which will pay us and allow us to be able to pay those professors of that curriculum. Therefore, we have brought economics down to the lowest level. You follow me so far? An example of the success of the program is that race riots prevailed in Wayside Jail in California about 5 years ago. We were called in to develop a plan of stopping those things. Your jails are segregated.
That's right.
The safety is that they must be segregated. We had a wonderful relationship with the Latino community over the last 10 years. We went to that community and created a coalition of individuals from both the African American and the Latino community. To make a long story short, we would go in and teach the curriculum, because that education makes a big difference in the individual who is now deciding that he wants to live a better life. And living a better life for himself, make a contribution to others living a better life. Well, we accepted the challenge in Wayside Prison. We're in our 4th year of that contract. We have not had riots or insurrections under our particular watch. The individual that ran that program, now you must listen to this closely, was an ex-convict, ex-inmate, been incarcerated for 9 years, joined American, learned the curriculum, became a professor of that curriculum, and was allowed to go in and teach that curriculum. Now, he's now off of parole. He has now taken over the leadership of his young person, and he is changing lives within the prison. Now that is the bang for your buck.
That's right.
Our other individuals in the juvenile facilities, teaching the juveniles, which are 75% Latino, but you're not just teaching them in the facility, you have an aftercare component so that when they come out of the facility, you can do what the congressman was talking about, because you have to deal with the services and the holistic approach, because their life is not just one step. It's a long-term approach, etc., etc. I see the uneasiness here, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. But all of these facts that I'm giving you, the various gang sets have come together in my home wanting a truce among themselves. So in 1994, we were able to create a truce in Watts, California, which lasted for 12 years. The crime rate went down to basically zero. The homicide went down to basically zero. The 4 housing projects that were involved were given tremendous credit for their restraint in carrying out this particular truce. Okay? Right at this particular time, American is in 16 states. It is a accredited course in schools. It has a relationship with Texas Southern to help them make the transition of young high school kids into college. They have what they call a summer academy. The curriculum now is the leading educational component in Downey, California, which will be an example of how American work with a community, meaning the police chief, the superintendent of schools, the mayor, and other local organizations to have the holistic approach to dealing with crime and dealing with the young people. So in my conclusion, American is an example of a system that has been put in place, that has proven itself in a quantitative way, but sometimes those of us who deal with human beings like the anecdotal more than the quantitative results, because people are not numbers, they're human beings. And I might say that when I met with Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, many years in Watts, she was applying herself using these principles as an individual and saved many, many lives. Now here is the whole deal for you that is mind-boggling. We're in juvenile facilities, we're in the jails, we're in the schools, and we're in the community. There was money that came down for gang intervention in California. American did not see 1 penny of that money.
Now listen.
Because most of your money goes to law enforcement, or goes to the concept of law enforcement, and law enforcement is not interested in you helping these people redevelop their lives, reinstitute themselves in their community and join their kids. Law enforcement is interested in incarceration. So they have gang sweeps where they put the net out and get the guilty and the innocent. And when you have an educational program that brings the crime rate down, you never get credit for it. Because if they don't get credit for it, then they act like it don't exist.
That's right.
And finally, when a great person in the prison system in California came up with a reentry program that was going to be fantastic, it was shelved. And the reason it was shelved is that the guard union, keep that in mind, they're very powerful. They represent the guards across the states. They told the government they did not want it. It was shelved. Therefore, there is no reentry program. Yet, because of the attitude of police and incarceration, we have 40,000 inmates that will be released into the community of Los Angeles in the next year. There is no reentry program. So you're going to have 40,000 individuals coming back in that community because incarceration has been the goal of law enforcement. They have no solution unless they're able to engage in organizations like American and other organizations and create the relationship between those inmates, their parole officers, and the community, and give these individuals a chance to have some kind of employment and some type of self-esteem. So on one hand, as an organization, I had to avoid the government funds, all those funds that come down for prevention, who are basically given to organizations that will report on the community, because all police want is for you to give information. Once we give information, we're out of business. So the education and rehabilitation is a thing of the past. So as I sit here and I listen to what is going on and I see the bills that we're trying to get passed, I applaud these politicians, and particularly Congressman here,
Yes, sir.
for their effort, because everything else is about incarceration and it doesn't work. It is not helping public safety. In fact, it is a detriment to public safety. And if you want a good example, law enforcement controls our prisons.
Yep.
They control our prisons. But in our prisons, you have the worst gangs on earth.
Brian, listen.
You have murder. You have rape. You have drugs. And that is supposed to be a secure situation of incarceration. Yet every example of negativism is represented in a venue that is controlled by law enforcement. So if they cannot control their prisons, what can they contribute to the quality of life of our communities? So that's my take on the whole situation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. I want to welcome Judge Hatchett to the panel. We will do brief introductions in just a moment. Just to respond briefly to Mr. Brown's presentation, if you have an opportunity to just read the summary of the Youth Promise Act, and even if you are one of those persons who loves to read bills and you just want to read the whole bill, you will find that American and the programs that Mr. Brown talks about are exactly the kind of programs that were in the mind of the authors of the bill. Because we understand that too often when federal funds are provided for prevention and intervention programs, they do go into the hands either solely of law enforcement, but they also go into the hands of other federal agencies. These dollars don't go directly to state and local organizations, and more importantly to those community-based organizations that are actually the ones who can reach the young people, who the young people see every day, all day. They don't have 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. hours. They're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And those are exactly the kind of programs that the Youth Promise Act is developed to resource. And so we do hope that you all will get behind this. We do have a, as Mr. Scott said, there is a support letter that currently has more than 240 international, national, state, and local organizations. If you would like your organization to join that support letter, you can just see me after this panel. I will give you my information and take yours, and we'll make sure that your organization gets added to the list, because we want everyone across the nation to be in support of this. We need Congress to hear loud and clear that the nation wants this legislation. Let me introduce the two panelists that are here, and we'll move on with our program. First, to my immediate right, Major Ernest Green. He received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Truman State University and a Master's in Human Resources and Management from Webster University. He is also a graduate of the National FBI Academy in Quantico. He strives to make a difference in the community as a volunteer affiliated with numerous service organizations. He serves on the boards of the University City Education Foundation and the Adult Education and Literacy Foundation in St. Louis. And he is also a mentor for Mentor St. Louis. Major Green's law enforcement career commenced with the University City Police Department in 1988. As a rookie officer, he was shot in the stomach while answering a call for a man who had shot a woman. He persevered and maintained his passion and commitment to serve his community. He is now Deputy Chief of Police and commands the department's Bureau of Field Operations and Internal Affairs Division. He's also Deputy Commander for the St. Louis Metropolitan Major Case Squad, which investigates homicides in St. Louis's counties and 3 Illinois counties. In addition to his 21-plus years of service as a police officer, he is an active member of various law enforcement associations, including the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, also NOBLE. Through his passion and commitment to NOBLE, he was blessed to be confirmed to the honorable post of National President of NOBLE this past July. Judge Linda Hatchett, to Representative Scott's left, is a graduate of Emory University School of Law. After graduating from law, she completed a coveted clerkship in the U.S. federal courts and then took a position at Delta Airlines, where she remained for almost a decade. As the company's highest-ranking African-American woman, she served dual roles in both the legal and public relations departments. She left Delta in order to accept an appointment as Chief Presiding Judge of Fulton County, Georgia Juvenile Court. Upon accepting the position, she became Georgia's first African-American Chief Presiding Judge of a state court and department head of one of the largest juvenile court systems in the country. The innovative judge soon garnered national attention for her creative sentencing, which can be seen today in the form of interventions on her television program, Judge Hatchett. She works in conjunction with community organizations and businesses, including the Boys and Girls Clubs and the Urban League, to design a program where troubled youth will be exposed to successful executives and community leaders who inspire them to make change in their lives. She's been honored with the Roscoe Brown Award, the highest award for outstanding work in criminal justice from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. Spelman College Board of Trustees selected her to receive the Outstanding Community Service Award, and she was also honored with the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall Award. In 1990, she helped find the Truancy Intervention Project, which enlists the help of legal volunteers to provide early positive intervention with children reported as truants. We're going to begin with Judge Hatchett, and then we will hear from Major Green. Judge Hatchett?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. To Congressman Scott, I thank you not only for this invitation, but I thank you for your tenacity, not just with this important piece of legislation, but for your tenacity and your perspective for all the time that you have been in Congress, and before that when you were still in Virginia as a legislator there. So I thank you for your leadership. It is not easy to always be out on the front line of the battlefield, but this is a battlefield that is imperative. It is about our children's lives, and we have got work to do. So let me just frame my comments briefly, and then I'm not going to take much time because I really want to get back to the conversation. But my opening remarks are fairly simple. I sat on the bench for a long time. I don't theorize about this. I have seen it. I have been in the trenches. And what I do know is that I have seen some of the brightest children come through my courtroom with tremendous potential. And but for God's grace, go you are out. And the difference in so many of the young people's lives that I have seen and I've tried to impact is that they did not have anchors. They did not have positive alternatives, and that they felt that there was no sense of hope. And this whole pervasive idea of hopelessness is something that we can correct. What this act does is that it really, you know, we talk about it very liberally in the sense that we talk about shifting the paradigm. It shifts the whole conversation. I mean, it turns it upside down. The Youth Promise Act really moves the agenda from how we are responding after the fact to how we are going to intervene before the fact. And so years ago, and Congressman and I have had this conversation on many occasions, years ago when the soundbite was 3 strikes and you're out, and that was kind of the catchword that a lot of politicians were using back in that day, that was the rallying crowd cry, 3 strikes and you're out. When I'm really proud to support this Youth Promise Act, because what it does is that we're not going to talk about 3 strikes and you're out. We're going to give young people some batting practice, so there will be no strikes. That is and so that's what we've got to do. We've got to flex our muscles. We've got to mobilize politically. We've got to mobilize socially. This is a conversation that we must have on the Hill. It is a conversation that we must have in our communities. So, what are we seeing now? We know that this whole pipeline, that the Children's Defense Fund study came out in 2001, which I've been very troubled by, that talks about the pipeline. I am concerned about all children. Let's be very clear. If you know anything about me, this is not a conversation specifically about black children. But when the study comes out and says to me that 1 in 3 black boys, and this study came out in 2001, will spend some times in their lives incarcerated, that is unacceptable. And so the conversation has to shift to how we invest on the front end. Not to oversimplify this conversation, I think that we've got to zero in on 2 particular levels, and that is the whole situation about educating our children. And I mean educating them holistically, and this whole issue of poverty. When you talk about the children being disadvantaged, coming into schools, not having had prenatal care, not having had adequate health care, when a child stands in my courtroom who has been detained twice, counted twice, by the time he is 3rd grade, and it finds out that he cannot see the blackboard, which is why he was not able to participate, because he had never had the proper screening. His parents didn't fail him. America failed him. And so now this child is effectively out of school. He's now in trouble. As a 3rd grader, he is standing before me in this courtroom, and they sent him upstairs to me because they didn't know what to do, because I usually don't see children on minor offenses. And they said, but Judge, this kid is so little, we don't know what to do with him. But when we peel back the layers, we talk about him not having had the opportunity. This is a child who would have been ripe for Head Start, who could have benefited from Head Start and those preliminary screenings, so that we wouldn't have effectively lost 2 years of his potential in education. So we've got to do education. We're going to save some of our rocks for later, but this poverty piece is serious. We have got to provide a level playing field for our children to have opportunities. One last comment, and I'll be quiet on this opening, is that I read, and I was really stressed by this, and I work in the system, and let me just read this to you. 2005, a report from the International Center for Prison Studies in London showed that the United States had 5% of the world's population but 25% of the world's inmates. Now that part may not surprise you, because I understood that part. But then it says, to your point, Mr. Brown, our incarceration rate is almost 40% greater than those of the nearest competitors. I mean, it's not like we're close to number 2. So 40% gap before you get to the second country on the state. But our democracies, look at them, we have a correction sector that employs, this is the part I want you to hear, more Americans than the combined workforces of General Motors, Ford, and Walmart. I work in the system. I was stunned. The correctional system in this country is a major industry.
Thank you.
We need to is that a word, disincentivize?
Now it is.
It is now. It is now. Disincentivize this sector. I want there to be a shift in after-school programs. I want there to be a shift toward these people being employed in Head Start programs. I want them to be community centers. I want there to be intergenerational centers. We have not only got to change this paradigm, we have got to change the whole construct. We can do better in America than what is happening with our children.
We look forward to hearing more from Judge Hatcher. So we've heard.
Oh, I got some stuff.
No, I know you do. We've heard from Congress. We've heard from the grassroots committee level. We have heard from the bench. And now it is time to hear from law enforcement, because where we all may take issue with the role law enforcement has played in the past, law enforcement does have a role. And we want to hear about that role from Major Green.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I sat here and I listened to Mr. Brown's comments, and I've been in law enforcement for 22 years, and I'm one, whenever a finger is pointed at me or my agency, if we've done wrong, we step up and we fess up. And one of the things that Mr. Brown has mentioned is that law enforcement, in many ways, has been a culprit or has been a part of why so many youth end up incarcerated or introduced to the system. And that is true. That is true. And so right here today, I'm here to say that we could do a better job, okay? We have failed in many aspects. I represent an organization called NOBLE. It's National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. It is, by far, the greatest law enforcement organization in the world. We represent over 3,500 African American and other law enforcement officials, chiefs of police, sheriffs, directors, you name it. We have taken a stand. This organization, we realize the significance behind issues like prisoner reentry and issues like juvenile violence. For instance, prisoner reentry. As those 40,000 inmates that Mr. Brown mentioned in California are going to be released very, very soon. The question is, how do they get jobs? And how do they matriculate back into their own community? We're taking a different stand than many other law enforcement organizations, and we're saying that we no longer want to look at past offenders as scum. And that's what many law enforcement officers look at past offenders as. They look at them as, once you're a criminal, you're always a criminal. Our process, our thought process, and our thinking is much different. We look at them as individuals that need a helping hand, thinking that if they cannot find a job, if they cannot find some type of livelihood to take care of their children and their families, then they're going to revert back to crime. So in that same vein, we did a study, and what came out of that study was a white paper that talked about prisoner reentry. And our thought process is, instead of just talking the talk, we're going to walk the walk. So what we're doing is encouraging all of our chapters, all 58 chapters, and some in international or other countries, to start assisting those individuals when they come out of jail to do things like find employment, which means that we need to give money, donate money for bus tokens or what have you, so they will have adequate transportation to go back and forth looking for employment. Number two, many of them cannot or do not have the proper clothing to go out and look for a job. So our chapters are going to start clothing drives. Number three, many of them have children that, if not careful, they will follow in mom and dad's footsteps. So we want to start mentoring those children to let them know that there is a better way. And number four, many of them don't have the skills to create or draft resumes or fill out applications. We, as Noble, plan on stepping up to help those individuals do those very things. Now, let's switch over to juvenile violence. We also spent thousands of dollars in a study over the last couple of years. We went to about 15 major cities in the United States, and we held town hall meetings. And in those town hall meetings, we had anywhere from 100 to 300 youth, ages 10 all the way up to 18. We invited the community in, and we talked about the issues that are facing our youth. We asked them in many of the settings, how many of you have had someone in your family shot recently? And almost always, especially in Chicago and Detroit, 80 to 95% of the children raise their hand. Many of them are afraid to go to school. Many of them come from broken homes. Many of them have been sexually molested. And then we encounter them and we wonder why they can't operate in a school environment. As law enforcement officers, when we respond to a call of service involving a young person, we need to take that in consideration. Everyone doesn't come from a household like yours or like mine. Everyone does not come from a Huxtable lifestyle. Many of them have one-parent families, and as law enforcement officers, we need to realize that. So what came out of that white paper, what came out of that study is, number one, police officers, all, white, black, it doesn't matter, need sensitivity training. Need to be more sensitive to what could be possibly going on in that child's life. Number two, there needs to be more community involvement. We talked about community-oriented policing. That process or that theory has been out for many, many years. That just means that you take various sections of the community and pull them together to deal with the problem. If your problem is gang activity late at night, then it's not up to us, like Mr. Brown said, to come in with a dragnet and lock everyone up. But what are the alternatives? So you bring in and you have meetings with your local clergy. You bring in the fire department. You bring in anyone who has assets that can help, your city hall, your public works department. You bring in your parks department. You bring in your business owners. And we sit down and we discuss how can we solve this problem. Maybe it's a fact that there is no place else for those children to go. So maybe someone donates their gym. It's as simple as that. It's called community-oriented policing. But I'm here to say, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, we want to change the way that all law enforcement look at children when it comes to violence and the way we look at offenders after they've been released back into society. So we're excited. We're going to be doing some very great things in the very near future, and we are a supporter. And we will always be a supporter because we think that it is very important that children have an alternative other than walking the line and going to incarceration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Major Green. And I want to take this time to say that to Major Green's point about the role that Noble has played and continues to play, Noble was one of the first and remains one of the few national law enforcement organizations to sign on in support of the Youth Promise Act. And since coming on in support of the act, they have not only lent their name, they've also lent their human power. They have been on the phone, they have been on the Hill in support of the Youth Promise Act, and so we appreciate them for their support. And so I just want to bring out a few more points, and then we are going to open up for questions.
Can we just invite people to come to MDC?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Those of you who are on the wall, we do have seats over here, and so we invite you to come and have a seat so you can be educated comfortably. A lot of folks, the general philosophy, understanding, belief in the community is that if you lock folks up, the community becomes safer. And the reason why we as a nation, started locking young people up is because we thought that they were committing more serious crimes, and we figured, well, if we lock them up and treat them like adults and put them in prison for longer sentences, then it will make our community safer. But a 2007 study funded by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and then echoed by the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, has found that based on all of the studies that have been done, the practice of trying, convicting, and incarcerating young people as adults, at best, has no impact on public safety, and at worst actually increases the likelihood that that young person will reoffend more quickly, and will commit a more serious offense once he or she is released from an adult prison, compared to a young person who committed the same offense but was served in the juvenile justice system, where he or she was able to access the treatment and the programs that they needed to deal with what their root cause is. A 2007 study by the Justice Policy Institute also revealed that according to studies that had evaluated the effectiveness of increasing federal funding for prosecution and targeted arrest in select cities, that the programs yielded little meaningful reduction in crime. In fact, suppression strategies actually tended to increase gang cohesion, which means make gangs get tighter, maybe even form alliances with other gangs, and also tensions between the police and the community based on sweeps and things of that nature. We also know that there's legislation currently pending that Representative Scott spoke to earlier that attempts to take a balanced approach to this issue. Some punitive penalties and incarceration over here, and some prevention and intervention funding over here. But if you read through the bill, you find that one of the provisions, one of the conditions of receiving some of the prevention and intervention funds is that the community has to partner with law enforcement on their gang suppression activities. In other words, the community organization has to become a snitch in order to receive the prevention funding. And so that's why we were excited to immediately partner with Representative Scott's office, because this legislation is unlike any legislation that we have ever seen at the federal or the state level, and it is certainly legislation that we intend on seeing passed, not just passed, but also funded. Because the fight ain't over. Now, let's get real clear. Fight is not over once the Youth Promise passes. We got to then get the Youth Promise funded. We don't want it to be a paper tiger. We don't want it to simply be an idea on paper. We want those dollars to actually be produced and actually get to the communities that they're meant to serve. Representative Scott.
Carol, I understand that Dr. Ogletree will be here in about 15 minutes, so if we wanted to go to questions, then interrupt the questions when he arrives. We can do that.
So we do have a mic in the middle of the room here, and so if you do have a question, I do ask so that we can get as many questions and have as much conversation as possible, that you limit your question so that we can give the panelists an opportunity to answer. And please introduce yourself. Okay.
Hello, my name is Joshua Fowler. I'm a native of Toledo, Ohio, and I served in many capacities. I was an acting U.S. Justice Department Women C coordinator. I was a teacher as well as a community leader. And I posed a couple of questions in combination with everything that people were saying. First and foremost, just like Martin Luther King declared war on poverty, we have to declare war against violence, because violence and poverty spawn off, and you're charged only byproducts of that. So we have to get to the root of the problem. For Mr. Green, in regards to the reentry of those 40,000 inmates, I know that in Toledo, Ohio, I posed the same question only for it to not be answered. if these men and women work, has the question of bonding, which is from the U.S. Labor Department, ensures that if you employ certain type of people that were ex-offenders, they ensure their employment with the intent to protect the employer in case of loss. Has that ever been posed? Mr. Brown, I was on the Black Student Union at Ohio State University, and you caused an argument between me and Archie Griffin in regards to why did Mr. Brown have to come in your territory to walk to Geiger's office when it came to helping our young brother named Mr. Correct. And I propose, can you come to Toledo, Ohio in that same manner, because we need a strong brother like yourself to take on the powers that be to recognize the problems that essentially are going on in Toledo, Ohio. And if you have time to schedule, if you can do that, that's the third one. And Ms. Hatchett, I'm sorry, in regards to sitting on the bench and so forth, are there any opportunities for a young man that wants to get involved in rallying and championing these issues to help articulate the issue, articulate the sentiment, the temporary problem, to help educate communities in between going to law school as well as trying to really care about this issue. So, for everybody, my questions, I thank you for your time.
I think if I understand your question correctly, was it a question, I mean, in saying, go ahead.
In regards to bonding, a lot of times, I know in Toledo as well as this can be across the nation, employers frown on hiring ex-offenders.
Yeah.
But now the ball is in their court because they're provided with an incentive that protects them from liability in case these so-called delinquents, whatever you want to call them, I call them people, the brother that made a mistake, or whomever. Has that been posed in your area in regards to bonding? Has that ever been articulated? Because a lot of people don't even know that it exists. Bonding can put a man that want to take care of his kids or someone who's been in prison all this time, opportunity, it lowers recidivism and reentry and so forth. Has that ever been posed? Because if it hasn't, you got to start talking, create the dialogue.
I don't think it has been in the same way as that.
I could probably respond to that question a little bit. My name is Diane Williams. I'm president of the Safer Foundation in Chicago. So we work exclusively with people with criminal records in an effort to get them employment. There is a national or federal bonding that's available. That bonding is limited to about $5,000 and is primarily for theft or something of that nature. So it doesn't really protect an employer from negligent hiring. But I would tell you that the approach has really been a state-by-state approach. So you'll find that in some states there's legislation that does in fact protect people from negligent, I'm sorry, not from negligent hiring, but from hiring a person that has a certificate or some sort of a, I guess, approval sheet to allow people to go to work. But I don't think that from the perspective of just a blanket relief for employers, that's probably never going to happen. There are too many things that could happen underneath that. But there are other ways, too, to work through that. You can look at things like the Professional Standards Association in your state. There are ways to move people to be able to get certificates. And when they get those certificates, then they cannot be barred from employment in that particular area. So there really are a number of different strategies that can be employed to help. And I can talk to you offline rather than taking up everybody's time.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Brown?
I'm not exactly sure of your question to me also, but let me take the opportunity to say this. We are not a civil rights organization. We are not a reactionary organization. We are a pro-active organization, conceived and developed by this mind.
Yes, sir.
And over 20 years, we have put systems in place that is rebuilding communities. And we have hundreds of examples of young people that have changed their lives around because our approach has been realistic. Now let me just say this. You heard the judge. This information is good for you. Judges are amenable to alternatives when they're given that opportunities. Sometimes they're the best friends of the community. So here today we have bills that are trying to get rid of that mandatory minimum sentencing so that these judges can do their job. An example of that is in Cleveland, you have judges that have gotten together with a second chance organization of their own, which when they have the opportunity, they refer a person to those classes, which is life management skills, they can get the GED, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is an alternative to incarceration. Okay? When I shook this man's hand, I was trying to give you all a signal. Because when law enforcement does what he is talking about, that is the most powerful entity that you can have on that community. When law enforcement is doing exactly what he's saying. So I was so happy to see the judge and to see this young man, because in my work as a proactive person, I know how valuable both of them are. So I say to you, I choose to go where I think I can be most effective in being able to have them where I can be utilized and to recognize the other organizations that are necessary, because as the congressperson said, it is a holistic approach that will truly bring about the example. The old civil rights thing is to react to discrimination and to become the victim and not to get up and do a doggone thing about our welfare and have millionaires and billionaires who do not put back in our communities and expect to be delivered. So the reason that I didn't go to Cincinnati, wherever you said, because I was making a choice on where I should be.
No, it wasn't questioning. No, wrong.
That wasn't it?
No,
Well,
I was proud. I was proud of the fact that you came here, and I posed a question. I said, Mr. Griffin, this young man was in trouble, you know, and I believe that you bring a certain type of temperament of change. I was proud of it.
Well, thanks. See, the audience don't know who Maurice Paulette is, and I do a lot of things personally.
Yes, sir.
So when young men get in trouble and their mothers call me, I take it on a personal level, not as a mayor I can.
Yes, sir.
So when I came in to deal with him, to deal with the coach of Ohio State, Jim Trussell, it was based upon the fact that this young man needed help. And we finally got rid of that athletic director who was not a very good man, the one that you mentioned. But see, this is almost like a private conversation.
Yes, sir.
We don't want that in here.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Okay.
Judge House?
Yes, I would say that we have to do what we can where we can. The fact that you are in law school sounds to me like you ought to be proud of what you're doing. But I also say that we have every opportunity, we should take every opportunity to lift as we climb. And so the mentoring, I think, is important that you do in your community, because you never know the impact that a conversation could have. There could be this young boy, 10 years old, who's on the brink, who is teetering on the brink of what he's going to do with his life. And to see a strong African-American man who's been a teacher, who's doing positive things in the community, can make all the difference in the world. You know, sometimes it's not globally that we have to think, although I think with this work that we have to do with getting this Youth Promise Act, it has to be global. But sometimes we also have to remember that the impact really is that connectivity on a one-to-one with young people whose lives, cross our lives.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Wallace Gator Bradley, former gang enforcer for the Gangster Disciples. I was blessed to be a part of a delegation in 1994 that met in the Oval Office with President Clinton the day before he gave his State of the Union address, and he came with that bogus crime bill because he did not listen then. Congressman Scott,
I didn't vote for it.
you have the power. I know you did. I know you did. But what I'm here to say by saying that is I'm standing here with a wealth of knowledge and wisdom from where I've been to where I am today. I love you, Brother Brown, because you allow myself and gang leaders from around the country to come and stay at your house in Beverly Hills, and it was not about making a movie. The power that we have now, with the short time that we do have, you got over 240 plus congressmen to support the bill in the House. All you needed was 218. You have the power, and I hope that you ask our president to allow you to bring a delegation to meet with him to help bring about, I'm talking about a solution. I'm not giving a suggestion. I'm talking about the power that you have. With Jim Brown, hopefully myself, and a very young brother here that's going to get up here and speak after me. And it warms my heart to see him because I remember when he was in the penitentiary for life. And he got his doctorate degree, maybe his doctorate degree, but I know he got a lot of degrees. And he come from the world that we have created. And that's how he ended up in the joint. But he's out. He's here. He's going to speak this for himself. But right now, our president can do so much without us having to wait for it to be legislatively asked of him to do. You got a Republican senator, United States senator, that's pushing this bill in the Senate. I know it was signed by Senator Roland Burris, the only African-American senator that's there now, along with Kennedy and Snowe. I think that's a lot that the president can listen to when he sees the power of this bill. He can move money, he can use any kind of phrase he wants to. Stimuli or stimulus. To help bring about what Jim is talking about. I'm a manifestation of what he's talking about. I know, brothers, Kubla Torre, man, he stand on your organization full force in Chicago. When we got a mayor that just got the right to bring back the Red Squad. Where we in the city where over 120 African-American men has been tortured.
Mr. Bradley.
And I'm going to end it. And ended up on death row for crimes that he didn't commit, to the point that the former governor closed down death row so those men could be freed. Saying what you saying. I'm just saying, I like for this body, this form that you have, and when you give a report to the president on why you want to have a delegation to sit down and talk to him, and we don't need no bill on no White House lawn.